User Experience Practice Lead, and today's session is all around Fiore. So to kick it off, I would like to give just a little bit of background on NIMBL and who we are for those that aren't necessarily familiar with. NIMBL is a US-based SAP consultancy focused on only one ERP, and that's SAP. We were founded in 2009, and we are based out of the Mile High City. We are over 100 consultants strong, with a lot of deep SAP expertise around more of the technical aspects of SAP, touting ourselves as one of North America's SAP technologists. From a services side, there are 9 distinct pillars that we focus on. One being Fiore, SAP's user experience platform, which Sarah's going to go into some deep detail, and the other 8 that you could see as part of our service portfolio, whether that's mobility, mobilizing the SAP experience, traditional basis, TDMS under admin and infrastructure, big data with HANA. NIMBL possesses what we believe is one of the strongest solution manager consultancies in North America, focused not only around the technical aspects of solution manager, such as managed services and technical operations, but the other components around the application layer of SolMan, such as CHARM, ITSM, solution documentation, BPCA. We have a Denver-based application management services offering supporting both Fortune 500 and mid-market around SAP break-fix, enhancement, and project. And again, all of that is based out of Denver, Colorado. We provide strategic advisory, trusted SAP consulting at the C-level around how organizations can maximize their SAP investment. And then finally, another area that we focus on is SAP security, governance, risk, and compliance, both from a SAP GRC software perspective, along with core SAP security and third-party products that help make someone's SAP environment more secure. So I'm going to hand it on over to Sarah Lottman, but Sarah's pretty modest, and I'd like to give a 2-second overview of NIMBL's SAP UX practice lead. We are tremendously blessed to have Sarah as part of our practice lead. Sarah comes from the SAP mothership, where Sarah had worked for over 5 years with SAP's user experience and Fiore and personas and personalization group to help develop some rapid deployment solutions specific to Fiore. So NIMBL is blessed to have Sarah leading this charge for us around this very exciting technology, and we've got an expert, and we're lucky to have her also obviously leading this webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it on over to the expert. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Yosh, so much for that introduction, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar today on Fiore. As Yosh indicated, there is just tremendous interest and excitement over Fiore, and I believe it has a lot to do with the recent announcement from SAP at Sapphire that Fiore now comes without an additional license cost. So as the title of the webinar states, Fiore is free, now what? The objective of this webinar is really to provide some education on what is Fiore, how can it benefit the SAP user community. We're going to go over the architecture and some different deployment options. I will be doing a live demo to show you what Fiore looks like both on a desktop and a mobile device. And then finally at the end we will save some time for Q&A. Which reminds me, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions about the content or Fiori in general, please type your questions into the chat. We do have some moderators who will be looking at those questions, and I will try to answer them all with the time that we have at the end of the webinar. So what is Fiori? First off, we want to go into a little bit of a brief history on how we kind of came to this juncture where SAP announced that it now comes without an additional license cost. Quite frankly, the user community of SAP spoke out loudly and said, hey, we should be entitled to a next generation, mobile-ready, easy-to-use, intuitive user interface. And these are just some random clips we could find out there of some of the organizations that spoke loudly. You can see some big names on there. We have ASUG, Forbes, but this is just a small snippet of what was truly going on behind the scenes. SAP customers really demanded this next generation user interface, and to credit SAP, they listened to their customers, and so you have to credit them for that. So bottom line, what is Fiori? Well, Fiori is truly SAP's answer to slow, outdated, and non-mobile ready technology. Over 2 years ago, SAP realized that the world is going mobile and web-based applications are really the future. And so a couple years ago internally at SAP, they began what I believe was sort of a small pilot project. And they built 25 applications that were mobile ready and dealt with primarily the ESS and MSS functionality, and it was limited just to ERP. So they built these 25 applications and they released them, and thus Fiori Wave 1 was born. So when they were first released, it came at a pretty high license cost, but those customers that bought into it and used it provided tremendous feedback and said, hey, this is great. I can now do my business transactions on the go in an easy-to-use format. And so over the next couple years, SAP began investing heavily in creating a lot more applications, and so that's where we are today. We have a total of 300 plus out-of-the-box applications, but now instead of just being limited to ERP, it runs nearly on every SAP module that there is. So CRM, SRM, GRC, and it covers a wide range of common and popular business transactions. Fiori also allows you to run anywhere, but I want to point out that it's commonly just misconceived as being a mobile-only solution. Yes, Fiori runs great on tablet and mobile devices, but it's also well suited to run on a desktop. And so the reason why I say that is one of the key concepts behind Fiori is providing a common and consistent user experience no matter what device you're using and no matter what module of SAP you're working in. We also have some flexibility with Fiori to be able to modify it and theme it to suit our needs, and I will show you some examples of that later. Another cool thing about Fiori is that it's built on an open source development platform, which is SAP UI5. And the reason why that's significant is because SAP customers are not just limited to those 300 out-of-the-box applications. Any custom business process you can think of can be built in UI5, and it will look and act and feel just like a standard SAP delivered Fiori application. And the final point here is we have some new tools now that SAP has provided us to be able to apply company logos or change the color schemes, and it's all done without coding. It's a drag and drop type architecture, and it's called the SAP Theme Designer. So what does Fiori look like? Really, it looks like anything that you want. You can see that middle image there. That is the standard out-of-the-box Launchpad that you get when you install Fiori and you load it up. But you can see there's different flavors with the other images here on the slide. And what that means is there's flexibility in how you want it to look. There's also different application types. So I can view data in a graphical type format. And there's also the capability to integrate your native capabilities on your phone. So you can see here we're leveraging the calendar. So there are 3 different application types that SAP provides us for Fiori. And the first type, and what I would say is also the most popular, are transactional applications. Now, transactional applications typically map one-to-one to a back-end SAP GUI screen. And so it's pretty much correlated with some type of existing business process that you traditionally do through the GUI. Fact sheets are a newer type of application, and what it allows you to do is see an overview of some kind of key process within your business. And then if I want to be able to drill down deeper into the details and get more information, I can drill down into those details. And the final application type is analytical, and this provides you with real-time insight into data and operations that go on within your business. And it's typically displayed in some kind of graphical format. So just to put a real-world scenario into these different application types, we'll look at a common scenario, which is sales. So I'm a sales representative, and I'm going to create a sales order. I'm working with a customer. I create the sales order, and then it gets approved. Both of those functions are pre-built transactional applications in Fiori. Once the sales order has been approved, it becomes an invoice. And now I'm going to view that sales invoice, and I'm going to see high-level information about it. So I can see the amount due, I can see the date it was entered, and I can see the customer that's being billed. But then I can also drill down deeper to see specifically what are the line items on this invoice, and what's the email address for that customer. So that's an example of a fact sheet type application. And then finally, I'm a sales guy. I'm meeting with my customer, and I need to be able to do it on the go because I have my tablet. And I want to real quick bring up an application that shows me maybe my most recent history with this customer. We want to look at sales data and maybe the most recent commitments. So that is an example of an analytical app. Couple things to keep in mind about these 3 application types is transactional works on any database that you might have. So anything on-premise or SAP HANA, while both fact sheets and analytical app types are limited to only work on HANA. So we have a little survey question here, so if everybody could just take a few seconds to answer this. We want to know what type of instance you are running in your landscape. Is it on-premise or HANA? Great. And we have the responses coming in. And as expected, it looks like the majority is on-premise, which kind of goes back to the earlier point that transactional apps, for the moment, are really the most popular. So the next piece of the webinar, what's in it for me? As an SAP customer, how does this affect me? And the first reason is, this should come as a surprise to nobody, but the world that we know it has completely changed. Everybody now uses some sort of mobile device and has the need to complete some kind of business transactions on the go. Fiori gives us this flexibility. And I think the one stat here that stands out the most is 81% of employees today use at least one device for business use. And if current trends continue, that number is just going to continue to increase. We are in a mobile world today. So the next survey question is, do you currently have a mobile strategy? Okay, we have the answers coming in. It's interesting. It looks like it's about an even split between those companies that do have a mobile strategy and those that do not. So the second big benefit to Fiori is the ability to have increased productivity. We talk to customers all the time, and one of the most common complaints about using standard SAP is the complexity of being able to complete some task. So you look at one of the back-end GUI screens, and there's so many fields, so many tabs, and it's just difficult to use. And one of the common complaints is I get a new employee, I hire a new employee who's not familiar with SAP. I've seen some of those training manuals for being able to complete transactions, and they're thick. So it stops or prevents that new employee from being able to be productive right away. Well, that's a problem, and that's one of the great things about Fiori is it's truly intuitive. If you use any kind of mobile device, you can use Fiori. There's no there's no manual that's needed to show how to use it. And so when SAP was developing Fiori, they only included the fields that were needed to accomplish the task at hand. So it's an extremely simplified experience. I'm going to tell a little story. Here at NIMBL, we actually recently completed a Fiori implementation for a manufacturing company. And they had the need to be able to use a simple, easy-to-use application on the shop floor that would be able to scan inventory in with a barcode and decrement materials that were linked to their SAP inventory. So before this Fiori implementation, they were using ITS Mobile. And for those of you familiar with that, that's pretty much just a slimmed-down version of old GUI screens. So we built a very simple, easy-to-use, intuitive Fiori application for them. And the first week after go live, their productivity was up by 65%. And I know that sounds like a crazy number, but it makes sense if you think about it. And the real reasons behind the increase were they got better performance. One of the main complaints for them is that when they would use ITS Mobile to scan in a barcode, it would sit there and spin forever. So the performance of Fiori was much improved. Also, it touches on the point I brought in earlier that there is less training required. They were able to bring in employees right away who could be productive right away. And then finally, it also limited the possibilities of input errors because we only put the fields there that were actually needed. We didn't have any extra ones there. So now I want to highlight what the new Fiori Launchpad looks like. And one big thing to highlight here is the Launchpad in Fiori provides you with a single entry point for all of your Fiori applications.
You didn't change some setting, did you?
And the reason why this is important is because I'm able to have Fiori applications, say, in CRM or in ERP. All of those applications will appear here in the Launchpad.
You can't see anything?
So each tile on the Launchpad represents a single Fiori application. And we also have this concept in the Launchpad of groups. Buyer, for example, is a group, as is sales representative. And it's important to note, and I'm asked frequently, how does the view of this Launchpad appear? It's all standard SAP security role-based driven. So I'm identified in the back end as being a buyer and a sales representative. Those are the roles I'm given in the back end. So this is the view that I'm given. So if you establish or configure an employee Launchpad, it's going to differ amongst employees in your organization. And a simple example is you're a manager and I'm an employee. So my Launchpad allows me to enter time and enter expenses. You're my manager. You'll have the ability to do both of those roles, but in addition, you'll also be able to approve my time and approve my expenses. So again, a key concept of the Fiori Launchpad is that it's all role-based security. So next we're going to talk about some of the architecture and deployment options that you have. And before we get into the architecture, I want to talk about the different components that make up a standard Fiori implementation. And the first one is NetWeaver Gateway. And the easiest way to explain Gateway is that it's pretty much the middleman between your SAP business logic and backend that contains not only the ABAP stack but also your database tables. So it's the interface between that and the UI itself, which in this case is Fiori. So it allows you to do a couple of different things. I launch a Fiori application, and I want to view some data. That data is going to be passed from the back end through Gateway to the Fiori application. And let's say I want to update some of these records, create new records, or delete some of them. That is then passed back from the UI through Gateway to be updated in the SAP backend. So it's truly just the middleman. The next is the SAP UI add-on. This add-on contains all of your UI5 libraries, the Launchpad, and the tools that you need to implement Fiori from a UI side. I had mentioned it earlier, but I want to make sure I highlight here is the SAP Theme Designer. And I know I said earlier, but we keep coming back to this point that SAP has made a major investment in making Fiori the UI of the future. And one example of this is the Theme Designer. And what it allows me to do is I can apply maybe my company logo and change the color themes. This is all done without any coding. It's a drag and drop, easy to use type infrastructure. Next we have the Fiori applications themselves. They sit on top of NetWeaver and are built on UI5. One important thing to note here is they are consumed via BSPs or business server pages. So they are web applications. And also because they're being run in BSPs, all of your standard NetWeaver security applies. And the final component is OData integration components. And this provides a standard interface that we talked about earlier between the SAP backend and the UI itself. Next we're going to look at the gateway deployment options. And SAP gives us two of those. The first one, and the one that I'm going to highlight, is the central hub deployment. This is what NIMBL recommends. So that top box there is a separate instance running NetWeaver 7.4 that contains just your gateway server as well as the Fiori applications themselves. Once that server is in place, you set up a trusted connection with all of the SAP backends in your landscape. So this example shows ERP, but you could connect it to SRM or CRM. So again, this is the central hub deployment, and it's what NIMBL recommends. The second option is the embedded deployment, which I won't spend too much time on. But pretty much what that means is you do have the option of installing the NetWeaver Gateway server in your existing business landscape. So I have an ERP instance. I can install Gateway directly in ERP. The issue with this option is that it's not scalable. So that Gateway server is isolated just to that instance of ERP. And furthermore, the real reason why the central hub deployment is truly the recommended option is because you don't need to upgrade your existing landscape. So one of the most commonly asked questions I'm asked from customers is, hey, if I want to go with Fiori and Gateway, do I have to upgrade all of my instances? And with the central hub deployment, the answer to that question is no. And again, the central hub deployment is scalable, so I can connect this one gateway server to multiple SAP instances. And the third reason why it's recommended is because it's just a more secure architecture. have another survey question here for you. Do you currently have NetWeaver Gateway installed anywhere in your landscape? And this applies to either deployment option, whether it's a central hub or an embedded deployment. You have the responses coming in here, and it's quite interesting. Again, it's mixed almost 50-50. Half of you already have NetWeaver Gateway installed, and half of you do not. So real quick, I just want to highlight the typical Fiori architecture, and keep in mind that this is for the central hub deployment. So you'll have your mobile device or potentially a desktop browser, and it'll be in between a firewall and it'll be connected to gateway, usually through a reverse proxy. And then gateway is established with a trusted connection to the rest of your back-end systems. And again, I know in this example we have ECC, but it could really be any other SAP instance that you have in your landscape. And that's through a trusted connection. So this is your typical Fiori architecture. So we're going to talk about the ability to customize SAP standard delivered Fiori applications. So first off, Fiori applications were built to run with standard SAP core. But I think as most of the people on the phone know, a lot of customers have highly customized landscapes and business processes. So SAP has given us a framework to be able to modify the standard out-of-the-box SAP applications. So you're able to configure the back end. You can add new fields, potentially delete fields, and we also have some flexibility to change the screen layout. So it's one thing to note is if you look at a standard Fiori application, it doesn't fit your needs, there are some customization options available to you. I've talked a lot about theming and the ability to be able to theme out-of-the-box Fiori, and this is just an example of being able to apply your own branding to standard Fiori. So on the left you have the standard Launchpad, and the right is the custom one with a custom color scheme. And again, this can all be done in the UI Theme Designer with no coding needed. The next thing I really want to highlight is you are not limited to just the 300 applications that SAP delivers out of the box. It's built on an open source development platform, so any process, custom process that you can think of that you're running right now is some use case to be able to build a custom built Fiori application. Can really cover any business scenario. And one cool thing about custom Fiori applications is that you're able to integrate them with the Launchpad. So to an end user, whether they're using a standard SAP application or a custom one, it's a completely transparent process. So next I want to do a quick demo so that everybody can see what Fiori looks like. And like I said earlier, I'm going to show it to you both on a desktop as well as a mobile device. So we're going to start out with the desktop. And this is the Fiori login screen. And you can see here that at NIMBL we put our own theming on it. So we have our NIMBL mascot here as well as our logo. So let me sign in to the Fiori Launchpad. And this Launchpad has not been changed at all. So this is the standard SAP delivered Launchpad. And again, I'm assigned these two roles in the back end. One is a buyer and one is a field representative. One thing I want to highlight is that the ability to customize what shows up in the Launchpad is able to be controlled by the user. So I'm a sales representative, but I can see I don't need to be able to track a sales order. I have the option to delete that tile from my view if wanted, and then I can also add it back as well. So at a high level, that's the Launchpad, and let's go into the Approved Purchase Requisitions application. You can see here on the desktop I have a list of all of the outstanding requisitions that I am set to be able to approve. I can click on them and all of those details will be shown on the right. I can hide the information if I don't want to see it. And then I have the ability to approve, reject, or forward this requisition on to somebody else for action. And it's important to note as well that standard Fiori uses SAP workflow. So this is all based on some workflow process in the back end. So I'll go ahead and approve this requisition. I can optionally add comments, but today I'm just going to approve it. It was approved, and now it's removed from my list. So we talked about those different application types. This is an example of a transactional application type in Fiori. And next, I want to make sure I get a chance to be able to show you what this looks like on a mobile device. Everyone should be able to see my mobile phone here. And one thing to note is that this is the exact same Launchpad that we were looking at on the desktop, only on a mobile device. Fiori is fully responsive, so you can see how the screen has adjusted to fit my iPhone. So we will quickly pull up the same application we were looking at before, Approve Requisitions. And it looks like I have lost connection, so my apologies, but I'm glad that you were at least able to see the Launchpad and compare and contrast the desktop to the mobile version. We are just about to wrap up, and I want to make sure we leave time at the end so that I can answer any questions that have come through. But before we get to the Q&A, I just want to say for anybody interested that NIMBL does offer some packages that allow you to get started implementing Fiori quickly. The first is a roadmap, and it's a 2-week engagement. What we do is we will come on site and meet with you for 2 days. We'll do some interviews, understand your specific use cases so that we can do a custom demo tailored to your needs. The second one is a Jumpstart package. It's more intensive, but in 6 weeks, NIMBL will come in. We will do all of the infrastructure, which means the gateway installation, and we will also fully configure 10 out-of-the-box standard Fiori applications. So let's move on to the Q&A. See, we do have some questions that have come in, and like I said, I want to make sure that we have enough time to address those. So here's one. Archie, it looks like you're asking, do analytical applications require HANA? And the answer to that is yes. So we talked about the 3 application types, transactional, fact sheet, and analytical. Fact sheets and analytical do require HANA. The next one, can we develop analytical applications on-premise? The answer to that is yes, you absolutely can. And in fact, that is a common thing that's done. UI5 gives us all kinds of different libraries that allow us to build graphical applications. And so it is possible to build your own analytical applications that sit on-premise. So when I say that you can't consume the analytical applications without HANA, that means the standard out-of-the-box SAP provided analytical applications. But you are absolutely free to develop and create your own. Let's see. So Rajan asked, how easy is it to integrate custom workflows to Fiori? That's a common question that I get from a lot of customers. And the answer to it really depends on what type of application you're using. I can give you an example. For an approved leave request app, we all know that SAP has their standard workflow template. And let's say your company uses a custom one. And that scenario is just going into config and pointing the Fiori workflow to be used to your custom one. So in that, it's quite easy. But if the out-of-the-box Fiori application isn't even set up to use a workflow, it would take a little bit more development. So it's a case-by-case basis. But in answer to your question, yes, you can absolutely implement customized workflows into Fiori apps. It says, how is the login handled by Fiori? Another good question. And as I had mentioned earlier, the Fiori applications are consumed via BSPs or business server pages. So it's just another line item in SICF. So what that means is typical SAP login rules apply. So I will log in using my given SAP user ID and password. You saw NIMBL's login page, and we did some customizations. But if you use standard out-of-the-box Fiori, they have their own login pages. But when you log in there, you're really logging into the SAP Gateway server. And another good one, how would you recommend that traditional ABAP developers learn SAP UI5? There is all kinds of documentation out there on SCN. And I would also like to point out for any developers that are out there, OpenSAP is hosting a whole Fiori UI5 training course that starts in September. So that might be something you want to join in on. And it should be a big help in moving from a traditional ABAP developer to UI5. How does the typical customer choose which applications to first implement? That's another good one. Like we said, there's over 300 applications out of the box. Obviously, a customer isn't going to implement all of them. So typically what I see is a customer will choose a module that will have the biggest impact within their organization. So for example, if they do a lot of materials management, they'll focus on those types of applications. So purchase requisitions, purchase order. And then they will roll those out in sort of a pilot type environment, gain feedback. And traditionally what I've seen in these types of implementations is there's a lot of excitement. And hey, what else does Fiori offer? What else can we do? And it just kind of grows from there. Let's see, how long does it take to build a custom Fiori application? This is a common question that we are asked, and it's truly a case-by-case basis. So UI5 development in itself is not difficult, but it really depends on the complexity of the screen that you're trying to build, as well as the back-end scenario. So that would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Let's see, Trent asks, when launching an app from a title, did it open in the existing Fiori window tab or did it open in a new tab? So standard config has it opening in the existing Fiori window. And then you have the home box in the upper left-hand corner so you can navigate back to the Launchpad. However, you do have some options. So if you want it to open in a new window or a new tab, you can configure it that way as well. So what enhancement pack is needed for Fiori? And again, that really centers around which deployment option you choose. If you use the Central Hub deployment option where you have a separate instance of Gateway running on NetWeaver 7.4, there really isn't a need to upgrade your existing landscape. Where you're going to run into requirements with having a certain enhancement pack in your landscape is if you want to do the embedded deployment, which is not the recommended option. The next one, can you decommission SAP GUI from your organization if you have Fiori? I'm sure many of you would wish the answer to this would be yes. But again, we have 300 out-of-the-box applications, but SAP GUI holds thousands of transactions. So unless you only perform the business functions that are already covered by Fiori, you still will have the need at some times for your SAP end users to still use the GUI. But again, it's highly role-based. So if I'm a manager and all I do is employee management and I need to approve time requests or leave requests, it might be entirely possible that I could just use Fiori and never use GUI. But it's going to be on a case-by-case basis with the employees in your organization. So do we need HANA to work on Fiori for purchase requisitions? The answer to that is no. That application that I showed you where you are approving purchase requisitions is a transactional application, and that works on-prem as well as HANA. To clarify, is workflow required for every Fiori application? And the answer to that is no. Some Fiori applications do use workflow. Typically your approval ones will, but not all use workflow at all. And we are running out of time here. However, there are many more questions. But I do want to assure everybody who put in questions, if I did not answer them, there will be a follow-up. I will be sure that all of these questions get answered. I want to let everybody know we have our next webinar planned, September 4th. Another hot topic in the SAP community is HANA. So stay tuned for those invites which should come out.